Greetings. I'm John Woodell. I'm a web developer at Google. I do Ruby stuff, Rails stuff internally at Google. This is Ryan Brown. He works on the App Engine team. And I guess Google does Google stuff in San Francisco, as far as I know.
Well, I work on App Engine, which is one of the teams that's here in San Francisco. There's a few others.
So we're going to talk about running JRuby on App Engine. So show of hands, how many people here have put a JRuby application on App Engine? Okay, like a couple people. So how many people have used App Engine? Python people, I imagine?
No.
And Java, okay. Well, if you had looked at doing JRuby on App Engine before these tools that we just launched recently, it was actually a lot more complicated, and we're going to talk about what we were trying to do there. So do you want to talk about that?
Well, sure. So in the past, to run a Ruby app on App Engine, you had to know a lot about JRuby at least, and possibly Java. You have to get JRuby installed. You have to bundle up your application as a servlet, write some XML files, things like that. It's all very ugly, very not Ruby-ish. So we've been working on trying to make it as simple as possible, as natural for a normal Ruby developer to get started. So we created a set of tools. Show you. Yeah. So we created a set of tools for setting everything up. One of the things we tried to do is take away the fact that you have to know anything about JRuby. So when you install the Google App Engine gem, it downloads the App Engine SDK for Java. It downloads JRuby, downloads JRuby Rack, installs it all for you. And then I'm just going to quickly, walk through getting started. Everything's based on Rack. So to start up, you create a config.ru rackup file. So here's just a simple example. Hello world.
Can you make it a little bigger?
Sure. Maybe. Can you see that? Okay. So there's your normal Rack stuff right here. Just simple hello world. And then additionally, you have to specify your configuration for App Engine. At a minimum, you have to specify your app ID and the version number, or version string, actually. You can specify all sorts of other things in here without writing any of the XML files required for Java. And then you run dev app server. There's a .sh for Java. It's .py for Python. And so for Ruby, you just run dev app server.rb. This runs under MRI and starts up automatically switch. Uh-oh.
Give it a dot?
I did not give it a directory. Thank you.
I thought maybe it was a new feature.
So as you can see here, the first time you run it, it installs JRuby into your application, installs the SDK, copies everything into your application, sets up the servlet directory structure for you. This is different. It used to be you used Warbler, which had a separate step where you'd package your directory or your application into this structure. But it would copy files around, so you couldn't run in an interactive development mode. We don't have that problem anymore. So you can see that's running. You can, well, yeah. I think that's probably good enough.
Yeah,
Right.
sure. So the nice thing about this is that as it copied all of those jars into the directory, it's actually copying everything you need. It's copying we don't have any gems here. It's copying your gems, it's copying JRuby, JRuby, and then basically freezing it into the application there. So you don't ever have to worry about anything on the local machine or up on the production environment. It's all packaged up for you. So do you want to show some more?
Well, you can show the Rails stuff. if you
Okay.
want.
So let's go.
So yeah, I mean, this will work with pretty much any Rails framework. If you go to our wiki page, we've got a getting started guide shows how to set up a basic guestbook app using Sinatra. Woody's going to show some Rails stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of take over here from where we left off. One of the things that Ryan was starting with was the page right here, Getting Started. The Getting Started guide shows you, oops, that's not what I wanted. I guess I'm waiting. The Getting Started guide shows the Hello World app that he just ran. It also shows a very simple guestbook app that configures data mapper and has a template and lets you create a guestbook, as I imagine many of you have seen on YouTube, in this case with App Engine. Okay, so I'm going to basically kind of poke around here and let you guys see what it looks like to deploy Rails application, because actually it's pretty straightforward. You can see me okay? Okay, so I'm going to throw this out. I'm going to go again to that same sample page that I was on. I published this page. It's called rails-primer.appspot.com, and it basically shows you the steps that you need to follow to generate a Rails application and push it onto App Engine, and I'll just do that real quick. So basically, I'll follow these steps. Now, I already have these apps, but you can see them again here. You'd basically, hold on, let me get this much bigger. So you basically install the App Engine apps, and oops, I don't need to do that actually. They install in the MRI. I want to go create an account on appspot.com, so I'll do that real quick. I've got a, let's go to appspot.com. Oops. I thought I had history. I cleared my history. Okay, so I'm logged in here as a new user. And I want to create a new application. I'm going to have to agree to this agreement here, and I'm going to create it. I'm going to call it Ruby test. I'm going to call it my JRuby test. Check the availability. It's available. Oops. And then I will save it. Okay, and then it says I got a dashboard for my application, and if I go back out one level, I have one application. It's called my JRuby test. So if I go back to my instructions here, I basically say that you want to type Rails my JRuby test, and I'm going to basically cd into it also. And hopefully Huda's going to come up here later and show us how fantastic Rails 3 is going to be, and it's going to help us work a little bit better with Data Mapper. So there, I've created my application. Did I have the most recent version here? Okay, so now I'm going to make sure that I have the sources I need to well, actually, I need to create a config.ru. Okay, so on the page, I basically give you the config.ru you need. Again, you can just copy it. And what I'm doing here is, again, I've got my configuration. Instead of my app ID, it's going to be my JRuby test. Oops. Oops. I'm in VI here. Okay. Am I good?
You have the noi, not new. Bottom, last line.
Noi?
Oh, no. Okay, we're speaking a new language here.
It's German Ruby.
Okay. So I'm basically doing the same thing that Ryan did in the previous demo. I'm also telling App Engine to strip out a bunch of files that I don't want to stick into production. I'm telling it that I want App Engine rack to tell me whether I'm in production or development mode, so I can work on the development server in development mode, and when I publish it, it'll be in production mode. And then I require this config environment, which basically runs the Rails initializer, and then I dispatch it. So now I should be able to actually run the dev app server. And that's really all I need to just at least start it. Now again, it's, I guess you guys can see that there. It's basically copying in the things that I need. And I'm waiting for it to come up here. So there's the app that I just published running on my local server. And it doesn't really do anything yet, but obviously it is a Rails application. If I want to publish it, I need to control C it here. There we go. I'm going to type app config update. It's going to figure out who is updating it. I'm going to give it my username. And as long as I did that properly, it'll upload it. So I just generated a Rails application, I uploaded it. Now I'm going to need to do some other work there to view it. But basically, if I go back to that console, here, no. I'm going to log in again. If I view my application, I see it running in production. Now, the next step, of course, is, well, what about actually configuring some data with it? And the instructions I have there on this Rails primer will show you how to check your gem sources, and I can basically do that right now. We want to get the most current version of Data Mapper. And I see that I have it. Then I would type, and actually my app isn't really doing much here now. If I look in the webinflib, I don't have any gems or anything. If I basically tell it I want to install these applications, what I've told it is run app config and gem install Rails DM App Engine, which is the wrapper that Ryan wrote for Data Mapper and to Data Store. And then I'm also installing the Rails Data Mapper gem that's going to help me generate models that are Data Mapper models, not active record models. Now, how many people, show of hands, have used Data Mapper before? All right, so if you go on the web and do a little research, you'll find that there's some efficiency that can be achieved by using Data Mapper. So that's what we want to use here. And I'm going to let this run here. The script to actually let this finish here. Those gems are actually then going to install into my application, and there they are. Let it finish up here. And hold on a second, and I should be able to type app config gem list, and it's actually going to do that command on the gems installed in the application. For anyone who's familiar with doing JRuby development, you install a separate set of JRuby gems, and in our case, we wanted to make sure that we didn't confuse people where you have JRuby and there's some gems installed there, and then each application that you create may have some other combination. So when you run the app config command, you're basically working with the gems and all the jars installed into your directory. And then, of course, I have this migration here that I put on the site that I hope will work. There it is. And there's my data mapper model. My scaffolding command isn't going to work with active record removed, so I need to do a little bit of work creating those by hand. And then the last piece that I mentioned here, is that you need to modify the Rails initializer. So I again copied a little piece here. If I edit that, that's not what I wanted. I think I want to go a little bit bigger here. Okay, so any point in here, I should be able to just insert this stuff. So I've told it I want to require DM core, and I'm going to configure it to point to the App Engine connector. I want to also use the App Engine logger, because if I try to run anything that actually logs on production, it will fail. App Engine will not allow me to write files. So just adding those 2 lines will now configure Rails to use the logger for App Engine, and everything will work great. I also told it that I do not want to have active record in there anymore. And again, I could just update it like that. It remembers that I logged in recently and I have a cookie there somewhere, and it's going to basically update it again. So now I added a model to my Rails application and I'm uploading it. I don't have a view to show it off yet, but if I want to, I could open up the console and play with that model, and I show how to do that here. There's a command, we're going to fire up IRB through app config like this, and then I'm going to also tell it that I want to bring in the Rails environment like that. And if you noticed, I created something called book. I'm going to require a PP so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to say B equals book new. So I have a new book. So I now have a book. I'm going to B save. Oops. I can't save yet. Well, I think that's the end of that. Well, anyway, but you can see I can create applications. I should be able to do this. Yeah, so it's saved. So you should be able to generate your models with that gem that I installed. You should be able to go into an IRB, load the Rails environment, create the models, work through them, figure out what you want to do, then go create your views and your controllers, and build a Rails application that does not have active record in it. You will find that when you remove active record, some of the generators don't seem to work very well, and you'll just have to work around that. When the next version of Rails is out, that should be all taken care of. So do you have any questions at this point? Anything other that you guys want us to talk about? Yeah?
What's the story about deploying from a centralized source control? Like if you have a source control repository on GitHub or SVN, how do you work that with your App Engine deploy command?
Well, so there's no way for automatically deploying from GitHub or anything like that, but I mean, whoever in your project has permission to deploy can just check it out and run the app config update command.
So, can it be only one person who deploys, or can you share a project and have more than one person push out?
Yeah, in the dashboard, he showed there's a section there where you can add developers to the project, and then they can all upload.
So
So how does this compare to other cloud types of deployments, like, I don't know, Heroku, or just doing your own Amazon server, you know?
Right.
things
Well, so
like that?
the biggest difference with App Engine, so I'm not familiar with Heroku, but like compared with EC2, where you're buying machines, on App Engine, you upload your code. We handle scaling it up for you, creating new instances of your application as you need on demand. We have a free limit, which is designed to be about 5 million page views a month, is free, and then you can set a budget if you want to serve more than that.
How's the performance compared to maybe an Amazon Web Service? Should point out that the data source.
Yeah, so I guess that's one
I mean,
thing.
As long as you have apples to apples.
Right. So the App Engine data store is completely different. It's non-relational. You can't use SQL, so you can't use Active Record. That's why we're using Data Mapper. It doesn't rely on SQL, so it's able to work just fine on the data store. The reason data store is not relational is so it can scale automatically. Any query you have executes in the same constant amount of time based on the number of results, not the number of things you're searching over. So whether you have one item in your database or a million, a billion, it's going to be just as fast.
There's also additional stuff like, I think in Heroku, they don't have memcache yet.
Don't have what?
They don't have memcache work, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so App Engine has a memcache API. There's some other APIs that App Engine provides. So I think it's very close. Heroku and App Engine are very close, except for the complete differences in the data store and the, and what Rails or whatever Ruby would normally use. But they're pretty comparable in terms of turnkey, deployment and that stuff. AWS is completely different. EC2 is like big hero.
That answer your question?
Yeah.
In the back?
You talked about any ways you might be limited by using JRuby. I talked to a Rails developer on the way over here. He said that there are certain libraries that wouldn't work, and I don't know if this is support or anything. Ruby 1.9. What ways does that change the game?
So the question was about JRuby support, if that limits you. You obviously can't run any native extensions. A lot of the most popular gems that rely on native extensions are being ported to Java. Some of those, like you can't use RMagic or Image Science, for example, on App Engine. But we have the Java Image API is available for doing things like thumbnailing, provides a lot of the same stuff. You also have the advantage that you can access really easily any Java libraries that you want to use in addition to Ruby libraries. I've found that incredibly useful in some cases, having access to even just Java's built-in collections APIs can be immensely more efficient than Ruby's in some cases. And they do have mostly complete Ruby 1.9 support, and they're working on improving it.
So, and I just did a sample where I ran JRuby-s gem install Twitter, and it brought down a bunch of things. It brought down Ho, and I could bring down Mechanize, and lots of things that you might imagine didn't work not so long ago. But I haven't really found that that's a problem. A lot of the things you might want to use have been ported, and people are working on that right now. So actually, I was actually going to take a sidebar here and show real quick that if I look at this other configure UI I have this section in here that says that I want to require administration, require SSL, and then I fire off Rails. And when that happens, we evaluate that and we generate the XML for you. And the XML for that is actually well, actually, this is one of the XML files. So this is what gets generated to strip out those files that I don't want. And then the other file is over here in WebXML. And it's created a lot of XML that you're glad you didn't have to figure out how to create by hand. The Java folks basically are going to go in there and read the docs and figure that out. Now, you'd have to read our docs as well to figure out what to do, but really you're just adding these one-liners into your rackup file. It's a lot simpler. So I'll show you real quick what that page does. If I go to my Rails primer, actually that's the wrong one. I have this source directory, and again, I can list on this application what's going on there. Oops. It's been idle here for a little while. Now, one thing you will notice is that your apps can take a few seconds to come back to life. And what have I done here? Oops, there you go. So I built a little controller and a view that lets me browse. And I see that, in fact, I have stripped out all those other files. If you'll look at what happens when you generate Rails, it generates all kinds of extraneous things. They've all been stripped out, and I can browse around here and see what's actually going on the server and see that it has, in fact, done what I expected it to. So even though you can't really technically log into the production environment, you can build some sort of code in your application that you deploy that gives you a view of what's going on, or possibly some sort of JSON API that lets you interact with the data store. And so it's really up to you to build that however you want. Again, my application, I've modified it here to display that it is in fact in production. I currently do have Active Record enabled, but I have a null DB adapter that's something I just added in order to configure it without trying to ask it to do too much. So, any other questions about that?
Yeah.
Yes. You were able to look at the files that were on the server? the App
That's right.
server? Does that mean that you're not using any of the static, that you're not using static files there for App Engine?
Right. Well, so with Java, your static files are by default uploaded with your code and as static files. In Python, they're completely separate, but for Java and Ruby apps, it's uploaded to both places automatically. So if you didn't want to upload your static files as code files, you would have to exclude them.
And that would count against your quota for the...
Well, it would count against your limit of number of files you can upload. There's no quota for code size.
And so I'm just showing, this is my local dev app server running. I've got a whole bunch of files in there. Over here I have very few files. Inside of webinf.lib, I have the jars that I need to run the environment, plus all the gems that I've added into my app get jarred up into this jar file. So every gem I ever add ends up just showing up in this one jar. So things can be deployed much faster that way, and you actually don't really worry about a file limit.
Right.
Question?
Over here first.
Could you talk about performance testing on App Engine?
What do you mean by testing?
Well, say that one has to live up to some kind of service agreement that this will, load and so much. And, there are many different ways to create an application, some slower, some faster.
Mm-hmm.
But in a cloud environment, how do you do profiling and seeing if things are going to scale the way that you've written the code, irrespective of that?
Right. Well, so there's different things you can do. You can run like the Ruby profiler locally. I think it might even be possible to run the Ruby profiler on your requests, like in production. You can, run a load test if you just want to see how well you're doing. People are working on some tools to analyze things like how many API calls you're making, so you can optimize things like that. There's some new features. The latest App Engine release, we had added a header so that administrators of the app can see how much they're charged for each request, so you can debug that way too. There's
But basically, when I hook up some kind of web test engine, this is going to hit App Engine, and we just see what it does?
basically, yeah. There's over there.
Can you talk a little bit about like request concurrency? Like, notice whenever the app was idled out and came back up, there's obviously like an app server behind there or something. Are there multiple processes? Are there multiple threads? Can I do requests?
There's no threads. You can do concurrent requests. We'll spawn up multiple instances of your app to handle the load. When we start up a new instance is one thing. You have to wait until your app starts, which can be pretty slow for JRuby applications. Hopefully Rails 3 will be much faster, but right now the first request for an instance in Rails can take 20 to 30 seconds. After that, it's much faster, like 300, 200 milliseconds for additional pages, but the first request for an instance can be pretty slow.
Do you guys let them time out after a while? Or?
Yeah, I think the current timeout is 30 seconds.
No, I mean, like, okay, it's up and going. Now, on some systems, they say, okay, if you don't get a hit on the application after a certain amount of time, they'll make it so you have to
Spins down.
Oh,
spin
yeah.
down, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Nice.
So yeah, it will over time. There's no set time limit. It's based on load across all applications. So if you're not getting traffic, though, it will spin down, and you'll have to start up a new one eventually.
And since you don't really know how many instances of your app may need to be spun up in order to serve the traffic, there's really no point in setting up a heartbeat monitor thing to try to hit it, because at some point a new instance will come up and do something. But if you build your app in such a way that it is, maybe using AJAX efficiently, it should be able to deal with certain requests taking a little longer. And so it's every so often you will hit that.
Here.
So, are there hooks in place or planned? I assume they're planned, but to interact with the rest of the Google Apps ecosystem. So, I want to interact with Calendar, or I want to use Google's authentication to retrieve somebody's contact list or something like that. Is that?
Yeah. So I mean, you can. Well, we have a user's API where you can use Google's authentication for your app. As far as interacting with other Google properties, we have API for just fetching URLs over HTTP, and so you can use the standard Google data APIs for using Calendar, logging in there, or whatever.
So is that a link that I can't see, the user's API that you referenced, or is that?
Yeah, it's not here. If you go, do you want to go to the project page? Yeah, if you go to API reference, we have docs for all of the under App Engine. So Oh, well, I guess that had a list of the APIs. Go back. So, yeah.
Right.
These are the APIs that are currently available here. There's more coming soon. If you look at the App Engine roadmap, we're going to have things like XMPP, large file uploads are new features we're working on.
Now, you can also, so the one thing that I showed in that configure you was it required that I was administrator. I could also just say require login, and I can tell my app to be part of some Google Apps domain that I've created. And so then my application is only available to the users in my Google Apps domain. I can also go into the app and I can say, it actually is called somehost.mydomain.com, and I can join it into my Google Apps domain and have it be this first-class service alongside Calendar and Mail and Google Sites.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so the data store. The question was just describing the data store, how it compares to other systems. So it's non-relational. It's basically a key value store with querying. Each entity is what we call what you store is basically a hash map. You can save different named properties in it. You can use either an automatically assigned numeric ID, or you can use a string key for finding things quickly. It has some interesting features compared with other databases. For instance, you can store a list of properties directly in an entity, which is sometimes quite useful. Instead of doing like joins, you can store your extra data right in your entity instead of having to do like 2 queries or something like that, or a join, which there's no joins supported.
I was trying to see if that's some data there.
We have support for transactions. It is consistent data store. When a write is finished, your data's been updated to, or has been saved to, like at least 3 hard disks. So writes are a little bit slower than you're used to in a relational database because of that. But you're getting a lot of extra safety that way. And like I was saying before, it automatically creates indexes for you, and the indexes are used, they're required for every query you run. And because we have those indexes, we can answer any query in basically constant time, essentially. It's based on the number of results and how long it takes to send those results over the network, not based on how many items you're searching over. Yeah.
So you said transactions are supported. Do you have examples of how transactions are supported from Ruby or from Rails to use the transaction facilities?
Not really. I mean, it's similar to the data mapper API. We haven't exactly implemented the standard data mapper transaction API because it depends on like locking, whereas data stores transactions are optimistic, and so if the way it works is you call like on your model object you would call transaction do and then give it a block of code, and it'll run that block. And if it fails because there was a concurrent write, it'll retry running the code up to like 3 times until it succeeds. There's also, there's this notion of entity groups, which is sort of like automatic sharding for you. You can only work on a single entity group within a transaction. There's a bug that right now there's no way to control entity groups in from the data mapper API. So that's one of the first things we need to get fixed there. But so.
That's a bug with data mapper itself?
Well, no, just the App Engine adapter for data mapper. So as it stands right now with data mapper, you can only run a transaction on a single entity, but hopefully
So-
that'll be fixed.
Something else that's, I think, a useful illustration of how this works is, since writes can be slow and you sometimes have to lock these transactions together, the idea is you focus on trying to denormalize your data when you have the write and then make reads really fast. So this shows how this best friends field is a multi-value field. So instead of having a join table that has this array of data, you can basically stuff as many keys into that one record as you want to show the best friends. And so when you get that one record, when that one entity returns, you have everything you need to know. You know how many best friends that person has, and you actually have the keys to those best friends. You don't have to go do any other queries. So your reads are very fast. You get an entity back and you have everything you need. It's a little bit like serializing YAML into a field like you used to be able to do with Active Record, but it actually is appropriate to do it this way.
Is there a search?
What do you mean?
You want to search all the values?
Yeah, so
For like a specific text string?
well, so the queries you can do, we don't have full text search. You can search for like equality, less than, greater than. There's a hack you can use to get like string prefixes. We don't we don't have full text search. There's things you can do, userland, building your own index.
Right, that was my next, but what's the size limit on value that you can store? Is there a size limit?
So for a single entity, so there's each API call you make anywhere in App Engine is limited to 1 megabyte. So if you're storing one entity in an API call, it would be 1 megabyte. If you're storing 5, then the total would have to be 1 megabyte. Any more questions in the back?
This might be a really dumb question, but following up what I asked earlier about JRuby, is there some reason that you just don't want to install Ruby, or is it on the horizon?
Well, so, I mean, there's lots of reasons. One of the biggest, getting new languages, implementing all the security and stuff for them is very difficult. So building on top of Java was able to make us get Ruby launched a lot faster. We also, after looking into MRI a lot, we found some problems with scalability that made us kind of worried. And JRuby seems like it's a lot better in that area. It's got better memory management. It's a lot faster in a lot of cases. So it looks like that's all the questions.
All right, well, thank you.
Thanks.
And so